Autumn, 1858, Colleton District, South Carolina. Rice fields flattened to the horizon in regimented green, their dikes and trunks holding back a tide that does not like to be told where to go. Cypress knees puncture black water like knuckles. In a drawer of the probate clerk's office in Walterboro, a drawer that sticks, a drawer that always sticks, a packet sits tied with faded ribbon, its seal broken and resealed twice, the way ugly truths are handled in polite counties. On the first page, in a hand that knows ledgers and orders, a planter writes a line he should not have written. 3 houses broke in one season, and every mouth says the same name. The next page is gone. The knife marks at the spine are neat, as if done by a man with time and a conscience that wanted to believe it was cleaning. In a second archive, the little private one that lives in family Bibles and under bedboards, a slip of paper rides against the end paper with paste so old it is brittle. The ink is a woman's, steady, slanted. She looked me in the eye, and I knew something in my house was over. The signature is only an initial and a surname, E.V. By the river, under live oaks cloaked in gray, stands a house that once wore a Greek dress. Columns, pilasters, a gallery that made strangers think safety, and now sits with a roof hole, like a remembering wound. If you pry up a hearth brick, you find a blue glass bottle tucked inside, a red thread still clinging to its neck, a bit of hair inside, and 9 roofing nails rusted to the color of dried blood. Her name, in the mouths that remember, was Saba. In the ledgers that tried not to, she is Sabina, or Sally, when men wanted to be sure they were logging a body and not a person. Enslaved, midwife, root woman, conjurer say some, the word with which a frightened society names a woman whose knowledge cannot be purchased. The most feared woman on the plantation say others, because men who thought they ruled every leaf discovered there was a kind of regard they could not compel. 3 families fell because of her, that is what is said. The Vandells of Laurel Bank, the Corbins of Cypress Hall, the Marstons, who thought themselves only temporary and learned otherwise. Between September of 1858 and July of 1859, a gin house burned, a master drowned in a trunk, an overseer's lockjaw taught people to count days in prayer, and a woman moved through rooms like a calm the river respects. Here is what the record, scraped and singed as it is by time and shame, lets us say. In 1858, the Vandell estate, Laurel Bank, 300 acres in Rice, a big house with a fan light and the sort of ceilings designed to feel cooler than August, listed a woman named Sabina/Saba, aged 38, midwife and nurse. On the same page, a penciled note, "Do not separate from Tempe." Tempe was her daughter. In April of that year, Tempe and her son were sold to Thaddeus Corbin of Cypress Hall to satisfy a note called due mid-season. The line item in the ledger's factor bears no comment. It was a transaction like any other, except that the transaction hit a human that other humans had learned to call by a name with weight. Between that sale and the day the sheriff tacked the notice to Laurel Bank's front door, to be sold for debts, 3 households within writing distance came apart. One lost its patriarch to an accident that people swear has a second set of hands under it. One lost a child, and with him the credit that kept the dikes in shape. One lost its hired man to a nail and a mouth that could no longer open to call for help. The coroner's docket lists misfortune. Neighbors, to one another and later to their granddaughters who knew when to sit and listen and when to ask, whispered a different word, Saba. But why did this happen, and why was it erased from history? If this story intrigues you, subscribe and ring the bell so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest historical mysteries. And tell us what city or state you're listening from. We love hearing from our community of history enthusiasts. Low Country, 1850s, the Rice Kingdom. South of Charleston, north of Beaufort, the Edisto and Ashepoo thread their brown needles through marsh and pine and make a net that caught the wealth of the Atlantic world. Wealth is a soft word. The truth is harder. The water in those flooded fields bred mosquitoes and money. Enslaved Africans and their children, the Gullah Gitche people, speaking a language the planters called a patois as if naming could make them feel in control, made the system work with knowledge brought from across the ocean. How to flood, when to drain, how to read the tide by a smell in the air. Planters stood on galleries and called themselves masters. The men and women in the fields did the calculus that taught a continent what rice can be. The law in South Carolina is a scaffold around a crime. The 1740 Negro Act and the codes that follow make it illegal to teach enslaved people to read and write, illegal to gather without a white overseer, illegal to move without a pass. The church is complicated, Anglican first, then Episcopal and Baptist by turns, set up to save souls and keep order in the same breath. A praise house will sprout by the quarters anyway, because people must sing or die. Conjure is a word white people whisper and laugh about until they see a bottle tree shiver with wind that is not moving. Hoodoo, they say, goofer, tricks. The Gullah call it work. It is medicine and justice at once. Root work is willow bark for fever and red brick dust at the threshold to keep harm from crossing. It is 9 nails under a lintel, blue paint under the eaves to send haints along, a black cat bone boiled down to nothing and buried where a man will have to. Humors, the social weather, and men who cannot bear not to know will call it poison and witchcraft in the same sentence. Saba grew up in this, on Sapello, say some, on Edisto, say others, on a marsh island whose name blew away with a storm, says the one who told the WPA writer in 1937. Her mother, Mama Rose, was the midwife for 3 places, small and smart, the kind of woman who caught more babies than any white doctor in the district and buried more placentas in ways that pleased the old rules. You never put a child's second life where a fox can find it, Mama advised, or that child will run all her days. Saba learned herbs the way a boy learns to walk a dike, by doing, by watching, by being told once and not allowed to forget. Sassafras for boils, leaf oak bark for diarrhea, blue flag root for swellings, wild indigo when a snake's business went wrong. Smile at the men when they made a joke of it. Let them believe fear is respect when it isn't. Laurelbank and the Vandels, Ephraim Vandel, who inherited the place from a father who counted wealth in barrels and bodies, Louisa, his wife, who managed a household with the precision of a ledger. 3 boys, 2 girls, 2 living to adulthood, because rice and river fever and childbirth respect nobody's last name. Ephraim is nothing to the world, a mid-tier planter with aspirations, but to the people whose lives turn on his moods, he is gravity. He wears town clothes on Sundays and rides his fields in boots that never know mud because he dismounts at the dike and lets younger men step into the low places. The Corbins at Cypress Hall are newer money. Thaddeus Corbin came up from Georgia with a smile and a guess and bought land dear because rice had been good those last years. He believes in the kind of luck that comes to men who believe in themselves. His wife, Eliza, is made for parlors and is bored on a road with 3 houses in a mile. They try for a son the way planters do, like a business plan. They get one, named Abel, pretty in the face and nervous of horses. The Marstons are in the middle of everybody's business by profession. They are overseers. John Marston can take a boy and make him a field hand, and it is to his credit or his shame depending on which house you are standing in when you tell it. He lives on the place, but not in it. Overseers are necessary knives that cut more than they need. Saba is the connective tissue in a geography that pretends people only meet where the law tells them to. She tends the Vandel's births and the Vandel's deaths. She dresses Corbin's wife when the woman gets stuck inside her own panic and cannot get out of a room because she is suddenly sure the ceiling has dropped. She sets bones for boys with more energy than sense. She rubs sweet oil into the bellies of women whose men pretend at night doesn't happen because they prefer not to think their power makes anything endure but their own pride. Her voice is low. Her eyes meet yours. She does not believe in rushing. Men who own clocks can be made to wait. She ties a red headcloth on market day. She puts 3 nails under a certain threshold and remembers every foot that has crossed it hard. What makes a woman feared in a plantation world? Not rage, not gossip, not a scene. Control does not fear those. It knew how to punish them before any of those girls were born. A feared woman is a ledger someone else cannot read. She knows things. She knows the ferry schedule and who got on it when he said he was going to the gin. She knows which babies were born when men were not at home but horses were still in the yard. She knows which barrels are light. She knows which doctor broke a fever by accident and swelled up at the applause. When the Vandel estate of Laurelbank hit a rough trough in 1858, the Panic of 1857 had eaten credit as cleanly as a copperhead swallows a frog. Ephraim went to Walterboro and wrote "Tempe and Child" on a line he promised himself was temporary. He sold Tempe's daughter and her baby to pay Carter and Miles factors. He told himself men have to do difficult things and women have to be told difficult things later so difficult things can be lived with. He misjudged what a woman can live with. The first sign, if you need 3 independent sources to feel brave saying a thing in public, was professional. Dr. Amos W. Laguerre, the kind of small-town physician who soaked up Philadelphia's Latin and brought it back to the Low Country in a bottle that said Latinum, begins a new page in his ledger. Mrs. Vandel delivered of a male, child, 7th month, Saba, midwife, present, placenta, delivered incomplete. Saba prevailed upon the family to bury properly. Mrs. V, subsequently feverish, advised rest. Saba applied fomentations of willow bark and yarrow. Fever broke. Beneath, in a smaller hand, probably written the morning after, Saba declined my pay, said to send it to the quarter. 2 weeks later, Ephraim rides up to Cypress Hall with Tempe's old shawl in his saddlebags to return something he cannot admit to himself he stole. He tells himself he will see the baby. Tempe refuses his eyes. She looks to the side in that polite way women have used to survive men for a long time and does not look back. Thaddeus, Corbin, laughs and claps him on the shoulder and calls him brother and mentions a shipment of barrels that went light. Ephraim rides home with sweat on his collar and calls for whiskey before dinner. Saba is in the kitchen, a little drift of cool about her when she moves, and he pretends not to notice because to notice would be to make a thing real he is not ready to call true. Then the gin house burns. It is not harvest, not the mad rush when gin and press run hot all night in pulses like a heart that has been asked to do too much. It is late September, the test run after a repair. A boy swore he doused the lamp. Another boy watched the smoke like it was a sermon. The gin house goes up quick, old wood extravagant to the flame. Men run with buckets that feel like teacups when the world is a mouth. The new roller splits with a noise like the sky coming down. The piece of iron the lawyer in town wrote down as overvalued returns to earth as a wheel of ruin. Nobody dies. The Vandel's accumulated advantage does. On the road the next morning, a woman named Eppie tells another in the way women swap rope to make it hold. Saba went down to the gin last Tuesday with a piece of red thread in her hand. That is all she says, because that is all she has to. People who need the rest filled in will fill it. Ephraim blames a boy. He blames dry wood. He blames God absent-mindedly at breakfast and takes it back because one must not get on the wrong side of Providence in a bad year. He sees Saba and tells himself he is a calm, rational man who does not truck with foolishness. He sleeps poorly. 2 weeks after that, a bolt on the small bridge over the drainage ditch on the south side of the Rice makes its point. The carriage wheel finds the gap with the special accuracy ill-made things have around arrogant men. On the way down, he has time to say ho, and then his body says something else, and a rib punctures a lung. He dies 2 days later. The coroner writes accident. The gossip says a woman left a cup of water under a step and set a mirror with a line of salt behind it in a way that sang the endpoint of a certain kind of man. Louisa, poor Louisa, who learned to make a house out of other people's hands and never got to be brave on her own account, wears black right. Saba brings her a cloth wrapped around something that smells green and sweet, and Louisa thinks at it, then takes it, because grief has a way of making a person try another person's God. The Vandals fall like a tree you've been pretending is sound until the wrong wind says it's time. Laurel Bank goes into trusteeship. The furniture sales are quiet. Silver disappears to cousins' houses. Children decamp to Charleston. Louisa goes nowhere because where would a woman go? Saba moves as if the mud has decisions to make and she will let them make them. Across the creek, Cypress Hall builds a bottle tree the week before Christmas. Thaddeus Corbin laughs and says to a friend, "Must keep the haints bay," as if he hangs blue glass because he believes in jokes. Eliza sends to town for a physician because Abel, the child with the pretty face and the nervous hands, has developed a cough that tastes like rust. Dr. Ligare comes with his Latin under his arm. Saba meets him at the back door and says quietly, "Taint his lungs, doctor." He pretends not to understand and hands her a folded paper for Tempe that is a piece of hope he can afford, because hope costs him nothing to give. In April, before the first big flood, before the trunks are opened and the sea eased in like she is being invited to supper, Abel wanders to the gate because the gate looks like adventure to a boy whose chores never asked him to learn the name of risk. The rice trunk is a simple machine that dominates a world, a wooden valve that yields when you pull it right and gives you a season and a future if you treat it like a king. Abel steps on its lip because being at the edge is the job a boy's curiosity asks for when there are no mothers watching. He falls. The water does the rest. It is an accident. Every witness will say so. Every mind that has been asked for years to be careful about how much time it spends on facts will do something else with it too. Eliza descends into a quiet that money and linen cannot pierce. Thaddeus drinks. He sells 3 boys and a woman to make up for the season that will be short with grief. Tempe goes to Laurel Bank's praise house on a night when the moon is mean and finds Saba sitting with her hands in her lap, as if hands without tools are themselves tools when a woman knows how to use them. By summer, Cypress Hall's dikes leak because a man cannot manage his water and his sorrow at the same hour. Weevils find the rice in the granary because the summer is the right temperature for things that eat. A roomer steps out of the quarters and onto the road like a person who has the right to walk there. Some say, "She salted the seed. She took a handful of the ground and put it in the bag and said the ground could do its own planting this year." Others, tired of other people pretending mystery's the only explanation, say, "No, he forgot the flood days. He wanted to be a man more than he wanted to admit the tide has rules." Either way, the Corbins are done. Creditors do not care which one is beautiful. They care which one adds to a sum that keeps them out of the worst conscience a man can have, feeling poor for long enough that his children start speaking differently to him. John Marston, overseer, does not see himself in either household's endings. He is a man who prides himself on looking at a field and seeing how to make it produce and how to make men do the suffering it requires. He dislikes Saba because she looks at him the way a person looks at a nail, useful sometimes, ruinous others, not very interesting. He took to carrying a stick and a pistol when Ephraim died, because men who love order hate fire. He put 15 lashes on a boy for stealing molasses, and 30 on another for looking at him like a man. He put 5 on Saba's grandson for being in the wrong yard at the hour he chose to be in it. He should have left that last off. People say his wife told him so. He did not marry a fool. He did not know which part of the world it was safe to obey. In June, a nail finds his foot. It is a small sin, a bit of iron rusted to the color of knowledge that sits under a lintel where a man who insists on walking a certain way will have to walk. He steps on it, because men who insist on walking a certain way always do. The puncture is small and clean. He swears, washes it, tells his wife not to fuss. The next day he limps. The day after that, he cannot open his jaw far enough to drink. The day after that, his back is a bow. The doctor comes with a lancet and a bottle. He cannot cut lockjaw away. No one alive could then. He dies on Wednesday, with his eyes open. On the kitchen doorstep at Laurel Bank that morning, there is a small bowl of milk. Cats will not touch it. The kitchen girl, who knows what women do for one another when men pretend they are asleep, knocks it over and leaves a line of brick dust where the bowl had been, and says, "Nothing." Louisa puts a mirror on the parlor mantel and leans a white cloth over it. Saba sits on the back step with her head down and her hands around her knees like a girl. She is not a girl. The sheriff comes too much in those months. He posts a notice at Cypress Hall. He brings a deputy to stand at the back door at Laurel Bank while they tally chairs. He walks past Saba twice and does not see her, an old trick women know well. He stares at the bottle tree by Corbin's Praise House and pretends he is not, because a man with a star should not need someone else's windbreak. He looks at the nails in a lentil at Marston's cottage and thinks, like a clerk, did a nail fall? He writes, misfortune. He goes home. There are other signs, smaller ones, that only matter if you add them up. A mirror is turned to face the wall. A hair ribbon turns up tied around a branch in the pecan row. A line of salt is laid behind a hearth, neat as stitches. The praise house hums low at night. Men who used to boast about their horses' speed leave small offerings on stumps like children. Saba is asked to deliver a baby, and she refuses, because sometimes the safest room for a woman is a room a midwife will not enter. The baby lives anyway. The husband does not. People like clean endings, like Saba burned the gin, Saba cursed the bridge, Saba set the nail, Saba salted the rice, Saba killed the overseer with a look. It is the way the story gets told now on porches when the sun is reckless and somebody's great aunt has the floor. Another version is equally clean and fits the records more like a glove. Rot and rust, the panic of 57, accidents on machines that are not careful about your mind, mosquitoes, tetanus, grief that eats men so they forget to close the trunk. The truth is not kind enough to be clean. Who investigated? In the way a modern story would like, nobody. A coroner came because the law tells him to when a man dies without a bed under him. A doctor came because white women called him, and he had a book to keep. A factor wrote hard numbers in hard ink in a hard ledger held by harder men. A minister listened and wrote very little because knowing too much about bodies makes the part of a man that wants to believe in spirits uncomfortable. A Charleston attorney wrote Sabina, Saba, nurse in an inventory beside a figure that makes the throat hurt to read now. A traveling northern botanist recorded blue glass bottle hung in live oak in a notebook he published back in Boston as a charming localism, without asking what the blue glass was catching. So, what happened? Theories spill out to fill a vacuum. The Conjure Woman, the most popular and the most dangerous just because it is satisfying. In this reading, Saba did what feared women have always been accused of doing, reached into the world where the seen and the unseen live together and did something to balance a scale no court would touch. Nails under a lintel, salt behind a mirror, red thread tied around a thing a man loved. The gin fire is red thread and will. The bridge is a cup of water under a step. The drowning is a water spirit paid. Lockjaw is justice that can't be postponed. It is a good story. It sells. It leaves nobody with responsibility except the woman, which is a tidy and wrong kind of comfort. The saboteur and her community. The story that scares planters more than haints, that enslaved people used what they knew of machines, of men, of tides, to ruin families that had traded in their bodies. There's a scrap of a letter in the Charleston Mercury denouncing seditious influence at Laurel Bank and Pine Ridge. An anonymous correspondent writes, "The Negro woman Sabina, commonly called Saba, has undue influence, she stiffens the people, she boasts what she has caused." If you are inclined to fear uprisings more than you are inclined to think about the slow uprising of a woman who refuses to lower her eyes, this explains everything and teaches you nothing new. The simple physics of the Low Country and the economy. Panic in New York and London sent a ripple into every dike. It forced men like Ephraim to sell the wrong people at the wrong time. He took his hand off the machine to hold a bill, and the machine did what machines do when a human is not looking. Rot ate wood. A bolt failed. The rice trunk is a danger to any child not trained by a tide. Tetanus is a common end in a land where iron and wet are married. It is also easy to explain because nothing is asked of your imagination. A story without a villain is easier to sleep on when you were the villain and prefer not to be. The blame shift. 3 families fell because of her is an alibi men wrote after they had failed at the jobs their pride gave them. Blame Saba, the visible, strong woman whose face you feared, so you don't have to blame the economy that made you cruel, or the gods of water and iron you ignored, or the nagging math that said you could not build a life on other people's blood and expect the bills never to come due. The quiet revolt of a midwife's ethics. The one theory that isn't a theory so much as a lens. Saba did her work. She caught babies. She eased fevers. She showed sorrow how to sit in a chair. She did not sabotage. She did not conjure more than any woman conjures when she ties a ribbon and makes a house a place that minds its own math. Men called her power magic because they were taught to believe any power they did not own was magic. They call her feared because fear and respect sit in the same chair in men like that. Separate fact from folklore, old as the bottle tree. Laurel Bank's gin burned. Vandell died on a bridge. A bolt is listed as defective in an insurance man's neat hand. A child drowned in a rice trunk at Cypress Hall. The coroner wrote accident. The estate followed the Vandell estate into trusteeship within months. John Marston died of tetanus after a foot puncture. Dr. Laguerre wrote trismus, lockjaw, in Latin. The Vandells, the Corbins, the Marstons, 3 households were cut down to a stump in a season. In inventory and private papers, Saba's name appears with the same regularity in all 3 places. There is no prosecution. There is nothing to prosecute. There are only 3 houses, none of them belonging to her, emptied of the men who were sure they owned everything in them. The records called it misfortune. The locals whispered something else entirely. After 1865, the Low Country learned a new set of words: emancipation, freedmen, reconstruction. The rice still rose and fell, but the men on the galleries no longer had the weight they had taught their daughters to expect of them. The bottle trees, always blue, glinted a little more in the sun, because the boys who had watched their mothers tie red thread now tied it themselves, even if they called it keepsakes in public and do not forget at home.